All righty. Well, welcome to episode 2 of the Making Nice with Naughty podcast. I'm Dr. Frances Robbins, and our co-guest or co-leader today is Dr. Tom Murray, and he is also the author of Making Nice with Naughty. Today, we are going to be talking about emotional leakage, but I also want to just recap in case you weren't able to listen to episode 1, to go back and listen to episode 1. It will make a lot more sense to listen to episode 1 before you listen to episode 2. And Tom, can you kind of give us a little overview of what we learned from last episode?
Yeah, so in episode 1, we explored the concept of the over-controlled temperament, which is the core personality characteristic that is discussed in the Making Nice with Naughty book. Did an overview of the OC characteristics, such as delaying gratification, valuing duty, obligation, rules, fairness, etc. And then we just touched on one of the core deficits of the over-controlled temperament, which is the low receptivity and openness, where someone is shies away from novel, the unexpected, avoidance of uncertainty, etc.
Okay. Well, I'm still trying to wrap my head around some of those, what we talked about last time. So with the over-controlled person, it's not a good thing or a bad thing. It's just, right. It is what it is. And they are not the folks that like a surprise party. So they want to have an awareness of everything before it happens.
Yeah.
Right? Probably not really good air traffic controllers or policemen. Although I think of policemen as being very controlled.
I think traffic controllers and policemen tend to make up a tremendous amount of the over-controlled.
Well, then how do they deal with uncertainty?
Well, they plan for it. So they love the planning, the simulations, going over and over and over.
Like the disaster plan, disaster preparedness people.
That's exactly right. So that idea of they can stay cool under stress, in part because they've habitualized these responses.
See. Yeah. I see. All right. So really they're not surprises because they've already planned for them.
That's exactly right.
But if they were to have something happen to them that was completely not coming out of left field, that's where they would have a problem.
That's exactly right. Such as, for example, the over-controlled person, maybe listeners know this, the flight control technology is so antiquated that it hasn't been updated in many years. And if that were to crash, right, I would imagine that would throw people in a tizzy.
Oh, I imagine.
Yeah.
I would imagine.
Or if someone doesn't, we'll be talking about emotional leakage today and how some of these people can respond when order doesn't occur. Right? They can get incredibly flustered. In fact, the most favorite F word of the over-controlled is frustrated. Oh. This is frustrated or frustrating, or I'm frustrated is a common word among the over-controlled.
I can see how that would be that way. I can certainly see that. So with the over-controlled person, to many people, you may not even realize that person in your life is over-controlled unless you maybe live with them or you spend a lot of time with them.
That's right.
And if you're in a community of over-controlled people, let's say those air traffic controllers, then they don't necessarily identify it as any kind of regularity. It's just, it is what it is.
It's very normalized, particularly if you're surrounded by people. It's like the military, people who are under control probably don't do very well in the military. I think about there was a time in our history where we would divert criminals. We would, say you can either go to you can go into the military or you can go to prison. What's your preference? And if someone was inherently under controlled, and that contributed to their tendency towards antisocial behaviors, going into the military isn't likely going to work out very long for them.
I was in the service for 10 years
Yeah.
and certainly saw a lot of that as well. With so when a person who's over controlled, they just lose it. And that's so out of character to their community of people. You call that emotional leakage.
Right.
I just think that is the silliest name ever, but so descriptive.
Yeah.
I'm a nurse. So when I think of leakage, it's never good. It's never good.
Right.
You have
Right.
anal leakage, you have wound leakage, right? You don't have like leakage of happiness or leakage of, I don't know. It's leakage just sounds like, ugh. So
Right. Right. Right.
but emotional leakage, it's it's so descriptive. Now, did you come up with that, Tom?
Thank you for asking that. No, that is a term that comes from Thomas Lynch, who's a American psychologist, and in fact, he's the originator of this concept of over-controlled temperament, or maybe not the originator, but certainly one of the most profound researchers in this area, and the father of what's called radically open dialectical behavior therapy, RODBT, and so in his observation, these people who are readily self-constrained emotionally, at times will have this emotional expression. I think about it as the adults at work who seem well put together, but then at home they lose their shit. Right. They
Right.
have
Right.
a what I call an adult temper tantrum. Right.
Mhm. Mhm.
And it's in those moments that they have a loss of this emotional regulation, in part because, over controlled people have a very long fuse. They have a very long fuse, and they're doing their level best to put out that fuse.
Mhm. Mhm.
They may repeat themselves at a calm tone over and
Mhm.
over and over again, or they'll strategize to avoid avoid stress in the future. But if despite their best efforts they aren't able to manage it, then they can have these temper tantrums and have these explosions. Or sometimes, it doesn't have to be anger. It can be a surprise emotional, like sadness, right? Because
Mhm.
over controlled people, in fact, I like to describe over controlled people as these folks where out in the world, if they're anxious and depressed, the world would never know it. In fact, I mentioned one of the
Mhm.
F words, frustrated, earlier. The other favorite F word of the over-controlled is when you ask them how they're doing, they respond with
Fine.
fine.
Fine. Fine. I'm
Right,
fine. I'm
right.
fine. Fine.
So emotional leakage is a byproduct of the second core deficit, right? So we talked about that low receptivity and openness. The second core deficit is low flexible control. Right? Low
Mhm.
flexible control. In other words, they tend to have this rigidity, this rule orientation. And when the world doesn't comport to those rules, that's when they're more likely to experience an emotional leakage.
When I think of emotional leakage, and then I obviously, I've seen it happen. I think all of us have seen it sometime in our life,
Yeah.
whether it came from ourselves or whether it was somebody that we were just a bystander. It can be very frightening.
Mm,
It can be
mm,
very frightening, and I wonder, I mean, not just to the person who's in the midst of this, it's their own emotional leakage that's happening, but it can
right.
also be frightening to the people that are around them
That's right.
because it's so out of character.
That's right. It's so out of character because you see this person generally operate, and over controlled people, we tend to do well during crises. Right?
Mhm,
Because we
mhm,
have a very limited range of an emotion. And
mhm,
so people find it comforting
Mhm.
in the midst of a crisis. You have that over-controlled person who seems to project that they got their shit together.
Because they've planned for it.
They plan for it, or they are so self-regulated
Mhm.
that even if they're anxious on the inside, like I've had moments
Mhm.
where I've had terrible anxiety,
Mhm.
right? Where I remember one time I'm a forensic sexologist as well, and I was visiting our local probation office, and they were interviewing me to see if I was of caliber to handle their clients, and the what really felt like an interrogation of my
Mm.
credentials, of my background, my clinical assumptions, et cetera, et cetera. I could just, it was a very threatening situation. And I kept my composure until I got in my car.
Oh.
When no one was looking, my
Mhm.
body started shaking uncontrollably. It was the
Oh my.
adrenaline
Mhm.
was finally
Mhm.
processing, and I just couldn't stop shaking from uh, uh, that experience. And so that gives you that. That's the other piece. That we tend to be inhibited emotionally,
Mhm.
right? And then we have
Mhm.
those moments where we're free to express our emotions, and we do. Sometimes we only do it though on people who we anticipate have a low probability of rejecting us because of our emotional expression,
Ah, ah.
right?
And
So
in your
spouses,
case in
yeah,
your case, it was yourself.
that's right. That's exactly right. Right. Or I remember my sons, they're teenagers now, but when they were playing soccer, my youngest in particular, I would do what over-controlled parents do, is say, we got to go in 30 minutes, 30 minutes. We have to go in 30 minutes. And they're still watching TV or playing or doing, then I say, okay, it's 15 minutes, got to go in 15 minutes. And then 5 minutes. And then right as we're getting to go, my youngest says, I don't know where my soccer socks are. I don't know where. And I'm like, I lose my shit, right? Because I was trying to put the fuse out.
Right.
And then, and so over control people, when they have emotional leakage,
Mhm.
underneath that
Mhm.
is the belief that some rule has been broken. And for
Sure.
me, it would be the rule: we must be on time. We must be on time because other people will judge me for being late as a bad parent. I have to be on time, as if that coach for that 8-year-old is making their living off of that win.
Of course. Of
Right.
course.
So it's totally ridiculous, but that is the mind frame or the mindset of a lot of over controlled people, is that when they have emotional leakage, it's usually tied to some particular rule that they
Mhm.
believe has to be followed. I'll give you another example. A lot of men in particular confuse respect with obedience. They'll
Oh.
say, my spouse doesn't respect me, right?
Oh.
And what they're, under closer examination, what you actually hear is that what they're saying is they expect obedience. But they would never use that because it sounds so yesterday. It sounds like, so completely
Mhm.
misogynistic. Well, that's what it is,
It is. It
right?
is. That's very interesting. I I have to tell you, when my kids were younger, I was just like every other mom trying to get them in the car, to get them out the door, to get them. And I was driving them to school one day, and I did the same kind of stuff
Oh,
to
yeah.
this to the point of, okay, get your stuff, we're going, we're gonna be dead, like this whole narrative of
Right,
getting ready,
right.
and was driving down the road with them in the back, and I was talking to my daughter, and my son starts laughing, and we had gone about 3 blocks without my daughter in the car. And
Oh,
I said, Where's your sister? And he's laughing. She's at home. I was so programmed.
Yeah.
Got to get you to school. Got to get you to school. Got to get you to school. And of course, growing up with a military father,
Mm,
time was very important. And you're always 15 minutes early.
right.
You're always 15 minutes early to whatever your appointment is. That's on time.
That's right. Yeah.
And in the military, they definitely want that because it's better for the subordinate to be waiting on their superior rather than the other way around.
Yeah, I can't imagine what would happen if it was the other way around.
I know. There'd be some pissed off people. We'd have a lot of emotional leakage.
Yeah. Well, in the first episode, I mentioned that over-controlled people tend to be hoarders, and they hoard different things. Some people will, hoard in the kind of classic sense, will hoard stuff, right? Clothes, a lot of stuff that has no value. They will hoard it, and they'll say, well, I got to keep it because what if someone needs it in the future?
Yeah.
Right? That's a very common. So they're hoarding it in case someone needs it in the future. But other people will hoard information like that psychological obesity that we may dive into. But time is another one of the things that a lot of over-controlled people will hoard. Can't waste time, miss time, etc.
I would probably say that is something that I am very cognizant of. Time, in the sense of when I think about I have so much time, it's a limited resource. How am I going to use that time? And then as we get older, at least for me, as I've gotten older and I look back on my life and I think, oh, there was a lot of wasting time.
Yeah.
That I can tell you that now I'm more cognizant of the time where I'll say, well, to be able to do that means I have to take away from this. And is that what I want to do? So there's more awareness. I don't know if it's necessarily hoarding time. That seems like an oxymoron, doesn't it? It's not like you have a time bank.
No, but that's a lot of people believe they have this psychological time where they want to be efficient, right? So efficiency is often a concern for over-controlled people. So they look for how to be efficient in the sense that if I can squeeze the more juice out of the clock, I can just do more. And for a lot of over-controlled people, it's in the doing and meeting goals and expectations that they derive personal value from. And so they see it as almost as I'm not getting the most value, right? I'm not getting the most admiration, the most recognition, et cetera, if I'm not efficient with my time.
In the military, what we frequently run into, and I see this out in the civilian world too, especially with veterans, is when there's a holiday week and you're only actually working maybe 3 days or 4 days, we'll fit a full 40 hours of work in that reduced week. Because we're cognizant of our work week, our time.
Yeah.
When that completely destroys the whole point of having the vacation or having that day off.
Right. Well, to kind of go from there relative to the fourth core deficit is low social connectedness and intimacy with others. So for a lot of people, following the rules, doing things by the book, actually can be create distance with other people. I think about the board game night. Some people get so adamant. We got to play by the rules. Monopoly. There's, some people have fights about whether the free parking gets money or versus it doesn't. What does the actual book say? And so they will spend surprising amounts of time studying the book to make sure everybody's following the rules. And that can be socially alienating. One of the most common complaints of the over-controlled people is this undercurrent sense of loneliness. So you can be so driven, you can be so rule-oriented that you end up alienating yourself from the important people in your life. You can be so internally focused that you're perceived as aloof, perceived as emotionally unavailable. At the same time, over-controlled people often do a lot of engaging in social comparison. What do other people think? What do other people think about me? Am I measuring up?
Yeah.
Right. And so you can see how all of that, those 4 deficits that we've covered, can impact people's sexual and intimate relationships.
It's like a dog chasing his tail in that last example. Just their over-controlledness causes them to be judged as aloof, distant, and then they have, they are thinking something different. It would be great if we all could really know what each other is thinking. That would be amazing. So many assumptions are made that are completely false.
That's exactly right.
So that really kind of tells us what we talked about last episode. And I think even probably dug into it even more this time. So again, episode 1, this is episode 2. I'm really curious to think more about that emotional leakage, about when that over-controlled person has popped the top, right? They've lost control, basically.
Yeah.
In whatever setting that is. Tom, does that person after they have that experience, do they experience a regret or an embarrassment or a guilt?
It depends on the context. So a lot of over-controlled people have a heightened sense of moral righteousness, right? So they may get angry because they feel that something is incredibly unfair. Before I became in private practice, went into private practice, I was the director of a university counseling center. And as typical of a lot of university administrators, you spend a lot of time on committees. And I have a very strong value of social justice. And as a consequence, I wasn't very good politically, because I would bring attention to things that were offensive relative to social justice, and so I'd get really agitated, and get really adamant. But I don't think I felt bad afterwards, right? Now, if I were in a different setting, where let's say someone is at a wedding and they drink too much and they make a fool out of themselves.
Sure.
Well, one of the fears of over-controlled people is being what they call kicked out of the tribe, right? Not being a part of a community. And so if that behavior led to important people in their life rejecting them, then they often could experience regret.
That's interesting, because they also can come across like they don't really care about relationships and that they're aloof.
Right. Well,
Right.
good point. So one of the core deficits I mentioned, particularly in the first episode, was this avoidance of critical feedback. Well, there are 2 styles and I don't talk about this in the book, unfortunately, but there are 2 styles of ways in which people avoid the critical feedback. The one is what we call the don't hurt me's. I'm sorry. The one is the don't hurt me's. And these are people who are broody, moody, sulking, crying. So they'll in essence respond in a way that that the other wants to then take care of them. So they drop their agenda in order to take care of the person who has the don't hurt me response. So they may get depressed and sullen after committing some social faux pas. The other way to avoid critical feedback is what's called the pushback, right? The pushback. And whereas the don't hurt me has a message of you don't understand me and you're hurting me, the pushback's core message is I'm not going to tell you what to do, but you better do what I want. Right? I'm not going to tell you what to do. You better do what I want. So I often give this example because pushback is my tendency. I tend to be a pushback.
Yeah.
And I give the example of my partner who she wouldn't mind me saying she is on the autism spectrum. And as is often the case with a lot of people on the spectrum is they don't have much fashion sense. Right? Or, they struggle with fashion. And one time she came down the steps and I said, "Is that what you're wearing out?" And she said, "You don't want me to wear this out?" And I said, "Oh, you can wear that out. I just won't be coming with you." Right? Which is classic, pushback. I'm not.
Was she wearing her pajamas?
It's the classic pushback of I'm not going to tell you what to do.
Oh,
But
right.
you better do what I want.
Oh.
Right. Of course, now I recognize that those pushbacks and don't hurt me's are a way of controlling the other. Right. And so once we recognize that we are doing those things, it goes a long way to stop doing those kinds of behaviors.
That makes sense.
They're unkind to the relationship.
If you look at that, if you have the emotional intelligence, right? If you can look and do some self-reflection and understand your actions and what happens when you behave the way you do.
Right. And that's what I'm hoping for with Making Nice with Naughty is that it brings attention to a very common personality temperament that has a lot of pros to it. But if there are going to be problems associated with it, it shows up in people's bedrooms. Yes,
or other rooms, or as you said last episode, balconies.
Yes. Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Oh my goodness. Oh my goodness.
Hello there, dear readers. I'm absolutely thrilled to announce the release of the Making Nice with Naughty audiobook, narrated by yours truly. As the author, I've poured my heart and soul in telling your story, especially how your psychological temperament shows up in the bedroom and how it gets in the way of intimacy. With every sentence, every emotion, I'm right there with you, guiding you through getting more meaning and fulfillment in your sexual and intimate relationships. The wait is over. You can now download the audiobook on Audible or from my website, drtommurray.com, and immerse yourself in where you reclaim the playfulness of your sexuality. My voice is your compass as you navigate through every titillating moment, gaining powerful insights from psychology. Claim your aha moment. Click on the link and join me on this unforgettable journey toward making nice with Naughty. Making Nice with Naughty audiobook, available on Audible. Download now.
So Thomas Lynch, is he still alive? Is he still around?
He is very much alive. Absolutely. He now lives in the UK with his lovely wife and does a lot of the trainings and research on RODBT. So anyone who's interested in the skills class, because RODBT, an important part of the work is participating in skills class so that you can learn more about how you show up in relationships and learn more pro-social behaviors, can take these skills classes.
Wow. He would be an interesting guest to have.
He would be, for sure.
I wonder what that would take.
We shall see.
It used to be that you could just send out a tweet and probably find him, but
Hmm.
now it's things have changed, which that is that thinking about that, it kind of takes my brain immediately to Elon Musk, right? And how he was unhappy with the Twitter accounts, how he said, "I'm just going to buy it,"
Mm,
to his detriment, right? So he buys it more money than it's worth,
yeah.
has to, sell the farm or mortgage the farm to be able to afford it, and then goes in and starts firing people,
Hmm.
changes the name, starts his own tribe. And if you want to be a member of my group, you have to do these things or
Right.
you're voted off the island,
That's right.
right?
That's right. There's a high degree, yeah, at least obviously I don't know Elon Musk, but his behavior suggests a high degree of moral righteousness, that he thinks, he has to be the protector of free speech,
Mhm.
but speech that is consistent with his values, right?
That's
Um,
very true.
and if someone's speech is not consistent, then like you said, they can kick the people out of the tribe.
Yeah, yeah. And so with just seeing his, now I don't know Elon either.
Aren't you neighbors?
Yeah, I don't know him either. And we would love to have him as a guest if he reached out to us. Although I don't know if he would ever even listen to this.
Right.
But just knowing that he has that ability, he appears to be that over controlled person.
Mhm, mhm.
When he has that emotional leakage, it seems like it's it's felt across, the society.
Yes.
And when you're in a place where your every move is being watched, I can't even imagine how much more stress that is on somebody
Mm,
to think that they go off and do something and then it's going to get, picked up by the news or the media outlets, or worse yet, people take a block of pieces of events, and then they tap it all together and say, "Oh, this is a real event that happened." How it must be in his home, if to the degree of the emotional leakage. And what I'm trying to say, and I know I went all over the place, is if he behaves that way in public, what do you think is happening behind those doors at home with his own family? Do you think that is it would it be typical to expect the reaction to be greater, or would it just be maybe a similar reaction?
well, of course, it would depend a great deal to the level of accommodation the person's getting, right? So
Mm,
all human behavior makes sense within a given context, and when you understand the context, then the behavior makes sense. So, if it to the degree that people tend to be quite accommodating, there may be no reason for any expression of emotional leakage. Of course, humans are fickle, and it don't show up in ways that you always want. If I'm not mistaken, we would have to do some research. I think he has a daughter who's rejected him,
mm,
and so that might be some indication of his emotional leakage. But then we can certainly swing the pendulum to the under controlled as a juxtaposition, and if we dare to go political, we can look at Donald Trump.
mhm,
Donald Trump has a lot of the core features of an under controlled person. Very impulsive, er-
mhm.
erratic, even when given advice, probably from very over controlled people.
Sure.
He appears to go against convention, and behaves in what some would describe as antisocial ways,
Mhm.
and that would be that would be very consistent with someone who is under controlled.
And in his case, the people who are supporters of him continue to be supporters of him despite all the awareness of his behavior.
Yes. Yes.
I find that very fascinating.
Right. I would argue though that one can be under controlled and over. There could be people who are over controlled and people who are under controlled who still follow the same leader. So it isn't like, oh, under controlled people would only follow Donald Trump, who I would say is under controlled. But you can have a lot of over controlled people who also follow someone who may be under controlled. So it's really
right.
It doesn't fall down clean and discrete lines.
I understand. So how do you know if you are an over controlled person or an under controlled person, or how does somebody know that?
Well, fortunately, certainly if the subtitle of the book, right, which is a intimacy guide for the rule following, organized, perfectionist, practical, and color within the line types, if that fits, then that's a good indication. In the book, however, I do include a self-test that is developed by Dr. Lynch that it's called it provides word pairs, and so one word is much more indicative of an under-controlled person, and one word is more its opposite is over-controlled, and so you take each one and you whichever side has the highest score is the side that best describes your level or where you fall on the continuum.
And then is this a self-test, or is this somebody you do this to other people? You test.
It's totally self-test, available in the book.
Maybe I'm looking at some of the words off your book.
Right.
And I'm thinking, well, in certain situations, in other situations, and maybe I have a tendency to read too much into it. For example, the first word pair is impulsive and deliberate. I would say yes.
How would people who know you tend to describe you?
From my perspective.
No, not necessarily from your perspective, but just, would most people actually think of Dr. Frances Robbins being impulsive? Would your staff, would your clinicians,
they would think I'm deliberate.
That's right. So, because a lot of over-controlled people can be hypercritical of themselves, that they aren't achieving as much as they should. They then tell themselves, oh, I must not be achieving as much as I should, quote unquote, because I'm impulsive, right? So we want to have a sense of what is the internal dialogue, but also what would a reasonable person looking at your life from the outside, how you present to the world, do you present in ways that are deliberate or impulsive?
Something I'm seeing on this list, and I don't know if this is diagnostic, but when I look at this list, and I just really welcome people to look this up in the book, but basically the words, one column is impulsive, impractical, naive, vulnerable, risky, talkative, disobedient, fanciful, fickle, act without thinking, animated, changeable mood, haphazard, wasteful, affable,
likable,
impressionable, erratic, complaining, reactive. I look at that list and I'm like, oh, those are all bad words.
That's right.
Right?
That's right. Yeah.
I don't know if that's diagnostic. And then I look at the other side: deliberate, practical, worldly, aloof, prudent, quiet, dutiful, realistic, consistent, think before acting, restrained, stable mood, orderly, frugal, reserved, not easily impressed, predictable, uncomplaining, and unreactive. And I just think that sounds so blissful.
Well, notice that even your tone changed as you were reading that second list of words. Yeah, we have, if you're over controlled, you're going to certainly resonate with those words on the right.
It's very interesting to me because I look at those with the different word pairs. The word pair that obviously resonates more with the over-controlled person, I read those and I think these are great character traits.
Yes. Yeah. And they are.
And
they are great character traits. Yeah.
So
They're
to me.
they're seen as values in the greater society.
So when an under controlled person looks at this list, I wonder, do those under controlled words, do they resonate with them where they think, oh, that is perfect?
That's a great question, and one that I don't have a lot of experience, because it's the reality is that as a sex therapist, most of the sexual problems that I see are a product of over-controlled
Of course.
temperament.
Of course.
But it would be interesting to assess that, and that's in part why we want to rely on the perceptions of other. So let me just also say that
Mhm.
according to RODBT, radically open dialectical behavior therapy, all human behavior that's observable
Mhm.
is a form of social signaling. So it's communicating something to the people who are able to observe the behavior. If no one's around and no one can see it, then it's not a form of it's not a social signal, right? But
Mhm.
if other people can see it, they're communicating something. And so if an under-controlled person reads this list, they may have gotten feedback from others about their behavior. In fact, under-controlled people tend to get a lot of feedback about their behavior, and they tend to get it pretty instantaneously, right? Whereas over-controlled people, they may not get a lot of feedback, but the feedback they get tends to be positive feedback,
Mhm. Mhm.
right?
That's interesting. I think of the under controlled characteristics come across like mania to me. If I have a if
Yeah,
I have a bipolar
right,
patient who's manic,
right.
for some reason or another, typically I see them when they're depressed. But let's say they just come in for a checkup. They are just, they're dramatic, they're unconventional, they're playful. They might be intoxicated.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
You know, all these characteristics I see, it makes me think of that manic person, and they would be the last one to tell you that there's a problem.
Right, right,
Of
right.
course it's mania, it's different, but
Yeah.
it's interesting to me. And because the over controlled characteristics are more in our society norms, and or what we want our society to be, in the sense of order and what makes a good citizen, I can see how those other characteristics are more favored, obviously. To me, living with someone who's under controlled would be really difficult.
Right.
Really difficult.
Yeah.
And the over controlled person would have a very difficult time. I would imagine that they wouldn't stay together very long.
Yeah. Yeah.
There would be all kinds of conflict. Have you seen that in your practice, Tom, where you have an under controlled person with an over controlled person?
I tend to find sometimes that happens, particularly if the relationship began as an affair.
Mm.
That's more likely
Mhm.
where it happens, and then they're coming in because having a viable, sustainable relationship with someone when it was the byproduct of an affair, as we know, second marriages have a higher rate of divorce than first marriages.
Mhm.
And a lot of people think, oh, it felt so good at the beginning, as a product of an affair. It's always going to be this way. And of course, it may be successful for some people, but certainly it isn't for many, many people. I talked about how the over-controlled, under-controlled are spectrums, and so at
Mhm.
the severe end of those continuums, with the over-controlled, we talked about treatment-resistant anxiety and depression, obsessive compulsive disorder, personality disorder, obsessive compulsive personality disorder, autism, anorexia. Those are conditions of severe over control. Severe under controlled, we would have things like borderline personality, narcissistic, ADHD, antisocial personality disorder. Those are the severe end of the under-controlled temperament.
It's just so fascinating to me. You know, this information that you're sharing with everybody is hopefully resonating with folks who are looking at their own relationships and trying to figure out maybe how they could do something better or how their actions affect others. And the more I listen to you and the more I, kind of read into the book, I think there's so much more here, Tom, than just your chapters show. Honestly, I think there's a lot of information packed in each line. Now, I do want to kind of sum up and kind of recap what we've discussed today, because we did take a little bit of episode 1, which was about the talking about the overcontrolled, and then we kind of went through today talking about emotional leakage and how that affects other people, what it looks like, when it happens, maybe what folks feel like after it has occurred. I'm interested in our next time that we get together, and I'd like to go into chapter 2 in your book and talk about sexual confidence. What do you think about that?
That's a great conversation to have, and certainly to whet the appetite of the listeners. Is we're going to talk specifically about sexual perfectionism and how it shows up in people's sexual lives.
I'm excited about that. Well, thank you so much for spending time with me today. I appreciate you.
I appreciate you too.
All right. Well, we will hopefully have an episode 3.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.